The diplomatic station orbited Kepler 452b in silence, its steel corridors gleaming under artificial light. The station had been human territory for 5 years now, a place where Captain Derek Patterson commanded a crew of scientists, soldiers, and dreamers who believed in reaching across the stars. Derek sat in his command center and watched the approaching ships on his monitor. 3 large Valorian vessels moved through space with geometric precision. The Valorians were an ancient species, crystalline beings who thought in mathematics and built civilizations from cold logic. The humans had been in contact with them for 3 years, and Derek still did not fully understand them. The lead Valorian ship sent a communication request. Derek accepted it, and a figure appeared on his screen. The being was tall and composed of colors that shifted like oil on water. The Valorian introduced himself as Speaker of Decisions, and his message was direct. "We have something to transfer to your station." The Valorian said in perfect English, "We no longer require this asset and believe your species values life beyond utility. This will be a test of your claims." Derek felt confusion rise in his chest. He asked what kind of asset they were discussing. "A queen." Speaker of Decisions replied, "A breeding queen from our empire. She has become infertile and serves no further purpose. We are prepared to deliver her to your custody within the hour." The communication ended before Derek could ask more questions. He immediately called his senior staff into the conference room. Dr. Rebecca Sterling arrived first, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. She had studied alien biology for 20 years and knew more about the Valorians than anyone else on the station. Commander Kevin Liu came next, running his fingers through his hair as he always did when stressed. The Chief of Security, Lieutenant Christopher Davis, was last to arrive. "They have a queen," Derek said without preamble, "and they want to give her to us." Rebecca sat down slowly. "What kind of queen?" "A breeding queen," Derek replied. "They say she is infertile and no longer has value in their society." The room fell silent. Kevin leaned back in his chair and whistled low. Rebecca began scrolling through her files on Valorian reproduction. The process was complex and deeply tied to their entire social structure. A breeding queen was the genetic foundation of their civilization. To declare one infertile would be considered a catastrophic loss. "This is a trap," Christopher said immediately. "They would never willingly give up a queen unless something was very wrong." "Maybe," Rebecca said thoughtfully, "or maybe they are telling the truth about her infertility, and they simply do not know what else to do with her. The Valorians are efficient creatures. They do not keep things that have no purpose." Derek made a decision. They would accept the transfer, but with extreme caution. All parties would remain alert. In 2 hours, the Queen would arrive, and humanity would have to figure out what to do with an alien creature of unknown intentions. The hours passed slowly. Derek used the time to review every file they had on Valorian queens. The information was limited since no human had ever met one in person. The biology files described creatures of remarkable complexity with cognitive abilities that exceeded human intelligence by significant measures. The queens lived for centuries, and their bodies could adapt to almost any environment. Their role in society was singular. They existed to breed and nothing more. When the Valorian ships arrived, Derek watched from the observation deck as a smaller transport descended toward the station docking bay. He stood with Rebecca and watched the airlock cycle open. A figure emerged. She was not what Derek expected. The queen was tall, nearly 3 meters, with 6 limbs arranged with terrible grace. Her body seemed to shimmer with colors that came and went like breath. The file said she would be magnificent, but they had not captured the feeling of standing near her, even from a distance. Derek could sense something profound in her presence, something almost like sadness. 2 Valorian guards flanked her on either side, and Speaker of Decisions walked behind them. The group moved through the docking bay with precision and entered the station proper. Derek led them to the receiving chamber. A neutral space designed for diplomatic meetings. The Queen does not speak your languages. Speaker of Decisions announced. Her name is Kethis. She has served the Valorian Empire for 317 of your years. She is no longer capable of fulfilling her function. She is now your responsibility. The Valorian government will have no further contact with her. The decision is final. Rebecca stepped forward as the designated medical officer and asked, "What is her current medical status? She is healthy and functional." The Valorian replied, "Her infertility is complete and permanent. We have provided all relevant medical files. These will be delivered to your systems." The Valorian turned and walked back toward the transport, followed by the two guards. They did not say goodbye. They did not look back. The transport sealed and departed within minutes. Derek found himself staring at the alien queen in front of him. Kethis stood motionless, her multiple eyes fixed on something far away. Her coloring had dimmed since entering the station, becoming less vibrant and more muted. Derek had the sudden awareness that this creature was in pain, but not the kind that could be treated with medicine. Rebecca approached Kethis slowly and spoke in a gentle voice. "We will not harm you. We want to help you if we can." Kethis turned her gaze toward Rebecca, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the Queen inclined her head in what might have been a gesture of acknowledgement. Derek made another decision. Kethis would be given quarters in the residential sector. She would have privacy and freedom to move about the station under supervision. They would not treat her as a prisoner, but as a guest, though both of them knew she was neither. That night, Derek sat in his quarters with Rebecca. They discussed what had occurred. Rebecca was convinced that the Valorians had hidden something important in those redacted medical files. Derek agreed, but he could not determine what. "Why give her to us?" Derek asked. "If she truly has no value." Rebecca shook her head slowly. "I do not know, but I intend to find out." The next morning, Kethis was settled into her quarters, and the crew began to adjust to her presence. She was quiet and undemanding. She ate when food was brought. She moved through the corridors with purpose, but without conversation. No one knew what to expect from her, and no one could have anticipated what her presence would eventually mean for all of them. Derek watched her from a distance and wondered what thoughts occupied the mind of a creature who had been cast aside by her own people. He wondered if she was afraid, or if she had already given up on hope itself. He wondered what secrets she carried, and what those secrets might cost them all. For now, she was simply the infertile queen, the burden that the Valorians had handed over to humanity, the beginning of something that would reshape not just the station, but the entire galaxy itself. Rebecca Sterling found herself thinking about Kethis at odd times during the day, while she was eating lunch or reviewing medical charts or walking through the station corridors. The Queen had been on board for 3 days now and had barely spoken to anyone. She ate when food arrived and remained in her quarters. The rest of the time, it was as though she had decided that interaction with humans was pointless. On the 4th day, Rebecca made a decision that went against protocol. She requested authorization from Derek to conduct a comprehensive medical examination of Kethis in a private facility rather than the central medical bay. Derek approved it, quickly asking only that Rebecca share her findings. Rebecca prepared the examination room with care. She dimmed the lights to a warm amber color. She arranged the equipment in the corner rather than in the center of the room. She even brought tea and placed 2 cups on a small table in hopes of creating a relaxed environment. When Kethis arrived, she was silent, but she observed these attempts at kindness. Rebecca gestured to the chair, and Kethis sat with grace that seemed to require no effort. Despite her large form, she moved as though she weighed nothing at all. Rebecca began with simple health checks measuring various biological functions. The Queen cooperated without resistance. She seemed almost indifferent to what was happening. Rebecca asked questions about pain or discomfort and received brief answers after 2 hours of basic examination. Rebecca sat back and looked at Kethis directly. "I'm going to ask you something important," she said. And I need you to know that I'm asking as a scientist and as someone who's trying to understand what happened to you. The Valorians told us you are infertile. Is that true? Kithis was quiet for a long moment, her multiple eyes focused on Rebecca, and then she stood and walked to the observation window. She gazed out at the stars with an expression of such profound loss that Rebecca felt tears spring to her own eyes. By the Valorian definition, yes, I am infertile. Kethis replied, her voice surprisingly gentle and clearly articulated. I cannot produce offspring through the standard breeding process. Rebecca moved closer. The question came out quickly. Did you choose this? The response was a long silence. Then Kethis turned from the window, and her voice carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. Yes, she said. I chose it. Rebecca sat down hard. This revelation changed everything. The genetic files suddenly made sense. The redacted sections were hiding the fact that this was not biological failure, but deliberate choice. Tell me everything, Rebecca. Kethis returned to the chair and began to speak. The Valorian breeding cycle was designed generations ago to ensure genetic perfection. It worked for a time, but over centuries, the cycle became everything. The new queens existed only to create more queens, and those queens existed only to breed again. The empire itself had become secondary to reproduction. I ruled 3 solar systems, but I had no freedom. My entire existence was scheduled around breeding cycles and genetic optimizations. I was not a person, I was a biological machine with high intelligence. Kethis said, How did you change yourself? Rebecca asked. I studied the genetic code that drove the breeding cycle. I discovered that the systems governing reproduction were not inextricably connected to cognition. I realized that I could modify my own chemistry to redirect those biochemical pathways. I spent 5 years working with a sympathetic geneticist to accomplish that. Modifications. Rebecca pulled up the medical scans on her monitor and looked at them with new understanding. The genetic engineering was sophisticated and elegant. It was not damage, it was reconstruction. I killed him afterward. Kethis said quietly, to protect him. The Valorians have long memories and would have destroyed anyone who helped me. Queen explained that the modifications had actually enhanced her cognitive abilities by freeing herself from the constant biological imperatives of the breeding cycle. Her mind had become clearer and more focused. She had continued to grow as a scientist and philosopher. Even as her people wrote her off as broken, the Valorians discovered what you had done. Rebecca said, and they decided to exile you. They were afraid. Kethis replied, a queen who rejected their highest calling was an indictment of their entire civilization. She was evidence that their system was not perfect, but flawed. They offered me imprisonment or exile. I chose to leave. They then offered me to your people, hoping that humanity would simply dispose of me and hide the evidence of their failure. Rebecca stood and began pacing through the examination room. Her mind was working through the implications. If a Valorian queen could modify her own genetics, then perhaps the limitations they claimed to have were not limitations at all. Perhaps the Valorians had simply never questioned their own assumptions. What would you want to do if you were free? Rebecca asked. Kethis tilted her head in a way that might have been confusion. You are asking what I want. Yes, Rebecca said. That is exactly what I am asking. No Valorian has ever asked me that question. Kethis replied, in my entire existence. The answer is I want to understand why my species made us into breeding machines. I want to understand if there are alternatives. I want to prove that being infertile does not mean being worthless. Rebecca made a decision in that moment. She was going to help Kethis regardless of the consequences. She was going to give this alien queen the one thing that no one in her own civilization had ever offered her. She was going to take her seriously. I need to run more tests, Rebecca said, but nothing invasive. I want to fully understand what you have accomplished. You understand the risk. Kethis asked, if I am seen as a threat, the Valorian Empire will demand my execution. I understand. Rebecca replied, and I am choosing. To help you, anyway, Cathes moved closer to Rebecca and extended one of her upper limbs, touching Rebecca's face gently in what Rebecca had learned was a Valorian gesture of profound respect and gratitude. "You are the first human I have met," Cathes said, "and you have already shown more kindness than my entire civilization ever did." Rebecca looked into the multiple eyes of the alien queen and saw something that she recognized in herself. A person who had been told she was not enough, and who had spent her entire life trying to prove that assessment wrong. A person who had learned to survive in a system designed to crush her individuality. A person who deserved to be seen and valued for who she actually was. Over the next weeks, Rebecca and Cathes spent more and more time together. Rebecca learned about Valorian biology and genetics. Cathes learned about human culture and what it meant to have choices that were not dictated by biology. The other crew members noticed, but said nothing. Derek had made it clear that Cathes was welcome on the station, and that was enough. Rebecca discovered through the genetic analysis that Cathes had identified something in the Valorian genome, something that suggested the civilization was heading toward collapse. The endless optimization was creating a genetic bottleneck. Without genetic variation, and without individuals who could think beyond the breeding cycle, the Valorians were slowly dying. This was the real reason the Valorians had exiled her. Rebecca realized they had not just wanted to hide a failed queen. They had wanted to silence someone who had discovered the fatal flaw in their entire civilization. When Rebecca brought this discovery to Derek and the rest of the senior staff, they understood finally why the Valorians had been so desperate to be rid of Cathes. Cathes was not broken. She was a revolution, and the Valorian Empire could not allow her to exist. The research facility that Derek authorized for Cathes was spacious and equipped with the most advanced technology the station possessed. It was located on the lower levels away from the main corridors, where the crew would not be constantly reminded of her presence. Cathes arranged it according to her own specifications. She created spaces for meditation and reflection alongside the strict scientific equipment. Rebecca worked alongside Cathes almost every day. They began with the foundational question: if the Valorian breeding cycle could be modified in one individual, could it be modified in others? Cathes had the theoretical knowledge. Rebecca provided the practical expertise in human genetics. They began to see patterns. The genetic engineering that Cathes had performed on herself was revolutionary, but it was also incomplete. It was a proof of concept, nothing more. She had freed herself from the breeding cycle, but she had not provided a path for others to follow. She had been a queen thinking in solitude. She had not had the tools to create a systematic solution. With Rebecca helping her, Cathes began to develop a comprehensive framework, a genetic blueprint that could allow Valorians to maintain their intelligence and their strength while gaining freedom from the breeding cycle. The work consumed both of them. They forgot to eat sometimes. They worked through the station's night cycles. Commander Kevin Liu began to spend time in the lab, helping with the mathematical models Cathes had created. The framework she was developing was not just genetics. It was a complete restructuring of how a species could reproduce and develop. The mathematical elegance of it fascinated Kevin. He had studied advanced mathematics at university, but he had never seen anything quite like this. Lieutenant Christopher Davis arrived in the lab one evening with a background that surprised everyone. He had studied biochemistry before joining the military, and he understood the nuances of what Cathes was building. He began to contribute ideas about how the modifications could be implemented safely. The team grew organically as people understood the importance of what was happening. Slowly, the framework began to take shape, not just a solution for one infertile queen, but a complete system that could transform an entire species. Began to speak more frequently with the team. She shared stories of her time as a ruler and how she had come to understand the limitations of her civilization. She described the Valorian Empire with neither anger nor bitterness, but with the clarity of someone who had seen a great machine grinding toward collapse. She believed that her species did not have to face that collapse. She believed there was another way. Rebecca realized that Kethis had been thinking about this her entire life. Even before her modifications, even before her exile, she had been observing and planning. The 5 years she had spent modifying her own body had been practice. A trial run for the much larger project she now worked on with the human team. One day, as they reviewed the latest simulation, Kevin said something that made everyone stop and look at him. "This is not just about saving the Valorians," he said slowly. "This is about showing that any species can evolve beyond its biological imperatives. This is bigger than just genetics. This is about freedom itself." Kethis was silent for a moment. Then her colors shifted to a brighter hue, colors that Rebecca had learned indicated something close to hope. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly what this is." Rebecca proposed that they compile everything into a research paper, a formal documentation of their work that could be submitted to the Galactic Science Council. Derek was hesitant. Such a paper would inevitably attract attention from the Valorian Empire. It would make Kethis and everyone involved with her a target for retaliation. "We have to share this," Rebecca argued. "If we do not, then what have we done? We have created something that could change the galaxy, and we keep it secret. That is not who we are." The paper took 3 months to complete. They titled it Cognitive Liberation, a Framework for Voluntary Speciation. Kethis insisted that Derek be listed as the primary author, with Rebecca second and Christopher third. She said that humans needed to be the public face of the work so that other species would be more willing to consider it. Derek refused to put his name first. "I cannot take credit for your work," he told Kethis. "That is not science, and it is not right." "Then list us together." Kethis replied that if my name is primary, many will dismiss the entire framework as the work of a biased party. I am exiled. I am infertile. I am exactly the kind of source that other species will distrust. But if a human researcher presents this work, if humanity validates it, then doors will open that would otherwise remain closed. The debate continued for days, but eventually, Derek agreed to a compromise. His name would come first, but only because Kethis' name would appear as a co-author with full recognition of her contributions. It was not perfect, but it was more honest than the alternative. Paper was submitted to the Galactic Science Council. Derek included a detailed explanation of who Kethis was and what she had accomplished. He made no attempt to hide that she was a Valorian queen. He made no attempt to hide that she had modified her own genetics. The work had to stand on its own merits, or it would stand at all. The response from the Galactic Science Council came within weeks. The paper was accepted for publication. Their work would be made available to every research institution in 1,000 light years. It would be impossible to suppress. The information was loose in the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Valorian Empire issued a formal protest demanding that the paper be retracted and that Kethis be returned to Valorian custody for crimes against her species. Derek denied the request. The station had given Kethis asylum, and asylum would not be revoked. A fleet could be sent, but they would have to answer to the Galactic Council, and the Galactic Council was deeply divided on the matter. Some species saw Kethis' work as a threat. Others saw it as an opportunity. Many species began reaching out, requesting more information, requesting collaboration, requesting permission to study the framework. But something unexpected began to happen. Valorian citizens started making contact, quietly, carefully, through encrypted channels that would have horrified their government. They had questions. They wanted to know if there was another way to live, if they too could be free, if they could choose something other than what their culture had defined as their only purpose. And in the hidden networks of the Valorian Empire, young queens began to dream of change. The Valorian Empire fractured in the way that only ancient civilizations could fragment, not with sudden violence, but with a slow, inexorable shift as the foundation shifted beneath everything that had been built upon it. The first sign of real change came when 3 major Valorian colony worlds declared independence from the Breeding Council. These were not distant outposts but established societies with millions of citizens who had begun to question the system they lived under. Scientists throughout Valorian space began incorporating Kethis framework into their research universities, created new departments dedicated to understanding alternative biological pathways. Governments found themselves unable to suppress a revolution of thought. The more they tried to shut down the discussions, the more people wanted to talk about what had been forbidden for so long. Captain Derek Patterson received a priority transmission that caused him to immediately call an emergency senior staff meeting. The message came from an anonymous source, but Derek recognized the pattern of communication as coming from organized Valorian resistance. The message was simple: we need your help. We need asylum. We need Kethis. Rebecca held the transmission token and her hands were shaking slightly. The message included a detailed list. 200 Valorian scientists and activists wanted passage to the human station. They were organizing escape routes. They were planning to leave the Empire and take Kethis research with them. The diplomatic implications were staggering. Derek called for a meeting with his senior staff. The question before him was not whether Kethis work was important. That had been answered. The question was whether humanity was willing to directly challenge the Valorian Empire by offering sanctuary to 200 of its most wanted citizens. Lieutenant Christopher Davis spoke first from a tactical perspective. If we do this, the Valorian Empire will consider it an act of aggression. They may demand military action. They may attempt to destroy this station or attack our world. Rebecca countered that they could not turn away people who had made themselves into targets for seeking freedom. That was what Kethis had done, and it was what they had embraced when they granted her asylum. Commander Kevin Liu looked at Derek and said, "We have already made our choice when we published that paper. When we put our names on research that proved the Valorian system was wrong, we committed ourselves to whatever consequences follow. This is just making that commitment real." Derek sat back in his chair and considered. He thought about Kethis and about what it meant to help someone change the entire trajectory of her civilization. He thought about humanity and what it would mean if they were willing to be the beacon for change in a galaxy that often chose the comfort of tradition over the risk of evolution. "We will help them," Derek said finally. "We will arrange transport for the refugees. We will offer them asylum and work. We will help them build a new society they are trying to create." The rescue operation took weeks to organize, but when the transport ships arrived, filled with Valorians who had chosen freedom over safety, Derek stood with his crew in the docking bay. They watched as 200 Valorians descended into the station, carrying with them files and research, and most importantly hope that change was possible. Aziz met with the refugee group privately first. They brought her news of her people, of the upheaval her work had created, of the leaders in her former civilization who had decided that there was no choice but to change. Rebecca watched from outside the meeting chamber as the Queen spoke with her own kind for the first time since her exile. When the meeting concluded, Kethis found Rebecca in the observation deck. They stood together looking out at the stars as they had done so many times in recent months. "They want me to lead them," Kethis said, "to help them build the new civilization, to guide them through the transformation. Derek wants you to stay here," Rebecca replied. "And so do I." Kethis turned to look at Rebecca, and her color shifted to shades that Rebecca had learned indicated something between sadness and certainty. "I cannot stay," she said gently. "My people are out there, and they are building something new. They are using my work to create a society where individuals matter, where choice exists, where a being can become more than what their biology dictates." "I know," Rebecca said. "I know that you have to go. I just wanted to tell you that I did not want you to." Kethis extended one of her limbs and held Rebecca close. The gesture was brief, but it conveyed more emotion than words could express. "Thank you for seeing me as a person," Kethis said. Thank you for being willing to help me even though I was born of a species you did not know. Thank you for teaching me that my worth is not determined by my utility. Rebecca would remember that moment for the rest of her life. She would remember the weight of Kethis' limb against her and the feeling of being thanked by someone who had been denied basic human dignity for 300 years. The transport that would carry Kethis and the refugee group to their new home was scheduled to depart within days. Kethis spent those final days saying goodbye to the people who had become her family in exile. She held the hand of Rebecca and told her that she would never forget her kindness. She embraced Derek and told him that his belief in her worth had given her the courage to believe in it herself. She sat with Kevin and Christopher and discussed the future of genetic modification and the ethical frameworks that would need to guide it on the day of departure. The entire senior staff gathered in the docking bay to watch as Kethis and the 200 Valorian refugees boarded the transport. One by one they passed. Derek and each of them spoke brief words of gratitude. When it was Kethis' turn, she stood before Derek for a long moment. You gave me my life, she told him. I was given to you as a burden, and you treated me as a person. That is all any of us ever truly need. The transport sealed and engines fired. The ship lifted away from the station and began the journey toward the free Valorian territories, toward a new home, toward a future that Kethis herself would help create. Derek watched until the ship was nothing but a point of light among the stars. Then he turned to his staff and said, "We have work to do. Kethis research is out there, and the galaxy will need guidance on how to use it. We will be that guidance. We will be the ones who help others understand what Kethis has shown us, that freedom is always worth the cost." 2 years after Kethis departed from the station, Derek sat in his private quarters reviewing reports that detailed the transformation of the Valorian Empire. The numbers were staggering. 3 million Valorian citizens had left the traditional empire to join the Free Valorian Collective, as they now called themselves. The breeding councils had disbanded, the genetic optimization programs had been halted, and the rigid social structure that had existed for millennia had simply fallen away. The Free Valorian Collective had established itself in 7 solar systems that had broken away from the Empire. Kethis served as chief research officer and advisor. Though she had refused the traditional title of queen, she said that she wanted to help guide her people toward a future where such titles were no longer necessary. A future where queens and workers and soldiers and scientists were simply individuals choosing their own paths. The changes were not without chaos. The original Valorian Empire had initially tried to prevent the exodus through force, but the Galactic Council had intervened. The council was divided on many issues, but one thing united them all. The right of individuals to choose their own future was something worth protecting. Rebecca received a personal message one morning, encrypted in Valorian mathematical language. She had learned enough to understand the basic translation. Kethis had written to her, "Me, dear Rebecca, I am writing to you on the anniversary of my arrival at your station. 2 years have passed and the time moves differently now. Time is no longer measured in breeding cycles, but in possibilities and hopes and dreams. The laboratory where we worked together in my memory has been recreated. Here, we have taken your methods and expanded them. We have helped 17 other species understand their own genetic limitations and how to transcend them. Some of them were on the verge of self-destruction, as my people were. We gave them another choice, and they chose freedom just as I did." Rebecca read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She sent a response immediately congratulating Kethis on the work she was doing and asking for detailed updates about the advances being made. The effects of Kethis' research rippled outward across the galaxy. In some cases, the applications were biological. In other cases, they were cultural and philosophical. Species that had been locked into rigid social patterns began to question whether those patterns were necessary or simply traditional. A fungal species on the rim discovered that they could develop individual consciousness if they chose to do so. a crystalline species that had existed in singular unified thought for 10,000 years, began to fragment into individuals who could think independently, and it was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Some conservative governments banned Kethis research and declared it heretical. Others attempted to suppress it entirely, but suppression only drove interest deeper underground and in the shadows of forbiddance. Knowledge movements began to grow. The desire for freedom, once awakened, could not be put to sleep again. The Valorian Empire itself went through profound changes, but they were slow and painful. The old guard government eventually resigned, and a new coalition took power. The new government acknowledged that the breeding system had been flawed, that Kethis had been right all along, that the empire had been heading toward collapse, and had been saved only by a queen who had the courage to reject everything she had been taught. Derek was invited to speak before the Galactic Council about humanity's role in facilitating these changes. He accepted and carefully explained how the station had simply treated an exile with kindness and dignity, and how from that simple act of respect, everything else had flowed. He emphasized that humanity had not forced change on anyone. They had simply provided shelter and support to someone with the courage to dream of something different. After his speech, Derek took questions from representatives of 100 different species. One question came from a young Valorian official who identified herself as the adopted daughter of Kethis. She asked Derek what he thought motivated him to help. Derek paused before answering, and then he spoke from the heart. I think humans understand on a deep level that everyone deserves the chance to become who they really are. We are not perfect at this, and we have failed many times throughout our history, but we believe in the possibility of redemption and transformation. We believe that a being can be handed over as a burden and become the solution to a civilization's greatest problem. I believe that Kethis could have been destroyed or imprisoned or forced to live out her days in misery, but instead she was given a choice, and from that choice came hope. Word of Derek's speech reached Kethis, and she sent another message. This one was addressed not just to Rebecca, but to the entire crew. She wrote, "I was given to humanity as cargo, as waste, as a problem to be solved or disposed of. Your species treated me instead as a person. You asked me what I wanted, what I believed, what I could become. You asked, and you listened. This is why humans will shape the future more than any other species in the galaxy. Not because of your weapons or your technology, but because you have the capacity to see value where others see only utility. Not because you are perfect, but because you are willing to try. Hold on to that belief. The galaxy will need it in the difficult times ahead." The message was distributed throughout human space, and beyond, it became required reading in schools and military academies. It inspired philosophers and artists. It gave people hope that change was possible, that transformation was achievable, that the future was not fixed, but could be shaped by the choices made in the present. Rebecca continued her work on the station, focusing on advancing human biological understanding in light of what they had learned from Kethis. She trained a new generation of scientists who understood that genetics was not destiny, that biology could be questioned and reimagined. Christopher eventually left the military and joined Rebecca full-time as they expanded the research. Christopher and Kethis collaborated remotely on several projects that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Kevin became the director of the human space program, responsible for helping establish new colonies throughout the galaxy. Derek served as captain of the station for another 10 years. He mentored dozens of officers and scientists who came to study the work that had been done there. He made sure that the story of Kethis was preserved and shared. He ensured that every human who passed through his command understood what it meant to see someone as more than their circumstances, more than their limitations, more than what someone else had determined they were worth. Years later, when Derek was preparing for retirement, a young human officer asked him why he had taken such a risk with Kethis, why he had jeopardized his career. and his station for an alien queen that no one wanted. Derek looked out at the stars from the observation deck and answered slowly, "Some decisions are not about risk calculation or probability. Some decisions are about who you want to be as a person." The moment Kethis arrived at the station, I had to decide whether I would see her as the Valorians saw her, as a failure, as a burden, as something without value, or whether I would see her as a person worthy of respect and dignity. I could not live with myself if I chose the former, so I chose the latter. And that choice changed everything, not just for Kethis, but for all of us and for the galaxy itself. The young officer nodded and walked away, understanding finally what Derek had always known, that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was to believe in someone else, especially when no one else did, especially when the entire galaxy had written them off as worthless. That sometimes revolution came not from violence or military action, but from a single moment of kindness that proved that change was possible. That the greatest gift you could give someone was to say, "I see you, I believe you matter. I will help you become who you want to be." And in the vast darkness of space, where countless worlds spun around distant suns, the legacy of one infertile queen, who was not infertile at all, continued to grow, spreading hope and possibility to a galaxy that had thought it knew all the answers to the fundamental questions of existence.